afternoon. The first item of business is a members' business debate on motion 20554 in the name of Rachel Hamilton on smoking ban for play parks and outdoor sports facilities. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and can ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call on Rachel Hamilton to open the debate. Ms Hamilton, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I firstly want to thank all members who signed my motion and for contributing to today's debate. And I also want to thank Alison Johnson, who has sent her apologies because she's convening a CPG, but she has supported my motion and is sorry not to be here. We're all too aware of the effects of smoking and passive smoking, and smoking damages the lungs of the smoker, and the smoke inhaled by people near to the smoker causes passive smoking damage. The damage that smoking causes, in particular to children and young people, is what I want to focus on today. And there is strong evidence. There's a strong evidence base which suggests that the implementation of a smoke-free environment can contribute to a reduction in smoking rates across populations. By maintaining smoke-free areas in certain outdoor as well as indoor places, it can discourage smoking behaviour in general, so making more places smoke-free could have a positive impact on adult smoking figures. In 26th of March 2006, Scotland became the first place in the UK to make it an offence to smoke in any wholly or substantially enclosed public space. 14 years have passed since the ban and the prevalence of smoking has decreased. Yet we see the Scottish Schools Adolescent Lifestyle and Substance Use Survey show that smoking prevalence rates among 13 and 15-year-olds have flatlined since 2015, with 12% of 15-year-olds and 4% of 13-year-olds smoking either regularly or occasionally. And this was really the starting point for me and why I want to see positive change and for us here to take steps. I saw the excellent work being done in my homeland of Wales in 2016, and it inspired me to think about implementing the same changes in Scotland. If I may, I want to recap on where we are today. Through parliamentary questions, I established that the Smoking Health and Social Care Scotland Act 2005 doesn't cover play parks or outdoor sports facilities. I was given assurances from the Minister for Public Health, Joe Fitzpatrick, that in the government's 2018 action plan, the Scottish Government would monitor the smoking ban in Wales before taking action. I was then advised by the Scottish Parliamentary Information Centre, SPICE, that there could be a possibility of adding a category to the list of no smoking premises in the 2005 Act. However, in the last session of the Parliament, when Jim Hume, MSP, introduced a members' bill prohibiting smoking in vehicles with children present, the approach taken in the bill was to create a standalone piece of legislation, and it did not amend the 2005 Act in any way and simply created a new offence. As we are fast approaching 2021, I regret that there is simply not enough time for me to introduce a members' bill and take that approach. I then looked at Section 4 of the 2005 Act, which allows Scottish ministers to define by regulation what is included as no smoking premises. These must be premises that are wholly or substantially enclosed, and one which meet one or more criteria. One of those other criteria is that the public or a section of the public has access to the premises. Others are that premises are a place of work, are used by a club or formal association, or are used for education or health care services. Accordingly, ministers can, through regulations under Section 4, ban smoking in any workplace or any public place, school or hospital, but only in any of these cases if the place in question is wholly or substantially enclosed. The regulations themselves can further define what is meant by wholly or substantially enclosed, and our understanding that this has so far been defined to mean closed in by walls or a roof, meaning that entirely outdoor areas could not be classed as no smoking premises. It may, however, be possible for ministers to make regulations banning smoking in play parks based on a revised definition of wholly or substantially enclosed, e.g. an area of grass that is enclosed by a fence. So after a long-winded explanation of how I got to this point, I look forward to hearing from the business manager later about the calls on the Scottish Government to look into changing the definition in order to enact that change. When we go when we go on about changing definition, it's right that we look at Wales where it has been done and has been done successfully. In the Welsh Act, in Part 3, there is an entire section, Section 12, which relates directly to the banning of smoking in play parks and playgrounds, and which I have here. There are clear definitions of what play parks, playgrounds and school grounds are. In Wales, it is illegal for people to smoke on hospital grounds, school grounds and playgrounds, with those who flout the law facing fines. Presiding Officer, turning closer to home, we have seen the positive action to stop smoking in play parks and various other outdoor areas already in Scotland, and these have been successful but voluntary in nature. Many local authorities have embraced smoke-free play parks, albeit with the enforcement through legislation. Don't get me wrong, this is a good place to start. In Dundee, for example, the council created a code which sees the public comply voluntarily with a smoking ban, with a request not to smoke in these areas. Whilst it does not ban smoking outright, it is a code which sets best practice. And I believe there has been very positive engagement from children and young people already through these voluntary bans, and the creation of smoke-free zones and more local authorities being encouraged to campaign accordingly would be a positive step initially. In my own constituency, I have the support of the Scottish Borders Council, and I will work with councillors in local schools later this year to create a competition to design signs which can be displayed in play parks to discourage people from smoking and adhere to a voluntary ban. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, I believe there is substantial cross-party support for this issue. I very much want to thank Ash Scotland and others who've supported me in organising today's debate. And I want to be clear, I don't want to stigmatise smokers, nor do I want this to be about the state denying people the right to smoke. Simply calling it a ban throws up negative connotations. It's about sending the right message, a positive message, to our children. We in this place should bring people along with us on the journey to a smoke-free Scotland. A simple definition change to the Smoking, Healthcare and Social Care Scotland Act 2005 would ensure that play parks, playgrounds and outdoor sports facilities are brought in line and made smoke-free. It could be done firstly through a simple consultation with the relevant stakeholders and then the relevant definition change. And as I've mentioned, when defining these public places, I believe it's right we turn to the Welsh legislation for where it has been so successful. The motivation behind my calls today aligns with the broader aims of the Scottish Government, which is to have a smoke-free generation by 2034 and to prevent the harmful effects of passive smoking. I hope the public will understand my motivations to restrict smoking in these particular areas, and I will respect these playgrounds as much as they would be places covered by no smoking legislation. We know that making play parks and outdoor sports facilities smoke-free would help denormalise smoking for children and young people, as the environment children grow up in strongly influences whether they are likely to smoke or not when they are older. I have no time left. I could go on, but thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Brian Whittle.
Presiding Officer, and I congratulate Rachel Hamilton for bringing this important issue to the Chamber today. As members may be aware, I've taken a keen interest in reducing the harm smoking causes since first becoming an MSP over 20 years ago. In July 2001, I proposed the regulation of smoking bill with strong support from colleagues across the Chamber, notably Labour's Dr Richard Simpson, Conservative Bill Aitken and Liberal Democrat Robert Brown. After 2003, this was taken forward by Stuart Maxwell and ultimately the Scottish Executive, leading to the Health and Social Care Scotland Act 2005. Unfortunately, around 1.1 million people in Scotland still smoke, and in 2017, the last year for which figures are available, there were 9,332 smoking-related deaths in Scotland. This compares to 1,136 alcohol-specific and 1,187 drug-related deaths in 2018. So although smoking-related deaths have declined by around 30% over the last 2 decades, shockingly, tobacco still kills around 1 in 6 Scots. Further to this, there are 128,000 smoking-related hospital admissions every year in Scotland, 2,500 a week, 250 a day, 15 an hour. Cigarette smoke contains more than 4,500 compounds, including acetaldehyde, a carcinogen, acetone, which damages the liver and kidneys, and ammonia, a cause of asthma and high blood pressure. Smoke-free spaces can bring so many benefits to both children and adults, particularly as other people smoke, is much more a nuisance. It has serious health risks. Living with a smoker increases a non-smoker's chances of developing lung cancer by 20 to 30%. Children are more vulnerable to second-hand smoke as their lungs are still growing and their immune system are not fully developed. They're also at greater risk from toxins in cigarette smoke. Tragically, it is estimated that second-hand smoke exposure in Scottish children causes, amongst other problems, at least 2,000 new cases of wheeze and asthma a year and 1 in 5 of all cot deaths. I'm proud of the SNP government's track record in the action taking to stub out smoking, but we must go further. And Scotland is among the first in the world to set a target of being tobacco-free by 2034. The SNP government has taken important steps to protect specifically young people from the harm of smoking for years, notably with milestone legislation raising the age to buy tobacco from 16 to 18 back in 2007. Tobacco sports sponsorship was banned 15 years ago, and it's now unthinkable for any high-profile team to be brand ambassadors for tobacco. Places where children play should undoubtedly be free from the stain of tobacco. The Chartered Institute of Environmental Health has said for years that smoking should be banned in all parks and anywhere where children play in order to reduce the chances of them growing up thinking that using cigarettes is normal. A YouGov poll commissioned by the Institute in 2016 found 89% of 4,300 adults surveyed backed a ban on smoking in children's play areas, while 57% wanted it to end in public parks. I'm delighted that this year smoking will no longer be permitted around hospital buildings, the latest in a long line of progressive and bold policies to protect people from harm caused by smoking. Presiding Officer, there's always more that can be done to protect people, particularly children and young adults, from smoking. 2/3 of adult smokers in the UK say they started smoking irregularly before the age of 18 and 2/5 before the age of 16. In fact, so very few adults start smoking that 99% of first cigarettes are smoked before the age of 26. The tobacco industry obviously targets young people despite its vehement denials. And it's vital that cigarettes and smoking should be out of sight and out of mind for our children wherever possible. I hope that we can all commit to help raise Scotland's tobacco-free generation and ensure that children's play areas and outdoor sports facilities are free of the scourge of tobacco. And I thank Rachel Hamilton once again for bringing this important matter to the Chamber.
Thank you very much, Mr Gibson. I call Brian Whittle, be followed by David Stewart. Mr Whittle, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I also thank my colleague Rachel Hamilton for bringing this debate to the Chamber. I think, as she quite rightly says, there's support across all political divides here for what she's trying to do here. I think this Parliament is quite rightly proud of the work it has led on the working place smoking bans. And as just been Kenny Gibson just said, that is beginning to be extended further into hospital grounds, which I think has been long overdue. However, I think when we're quoting the reduction in overall smoking, I do think we need to look behind the figures. And one of the things that did alarm me a little bit is that recent statistics are indicating that for the first time since the smoking ban, there might be a small increase. But in looking behind the reduction in smoking over since the smoking ban, I think it's worth noting that in the highest SIMD quintile, only 9% of people are now smoking. But in the lowest SIMD quintile, it still sits at 34%. And I looked over some of the notes that I'd done a while ago when I was working with Ash and whatnot, and a report that I was doing, and I was looking at, as Kenny Gibson said, there's around about 1 million Scots who still smoke, and my figures were around 10,000 people dying of smoke-related diseases annually. And if we could tackle this, if we could really make inroads into this, it would save the Scottish NHS an estimated £100 million. And probably the biggest start for me is that lowest 20%, the poorest 20%, it would save them £100 million as well. And I do think it's worth mentioning this when we are always looking at how we look at the sustainability of funding our NHS. We're talking all the time about the preventable health agenda, and we're always discussing steps and how we can lift people out of poverty. Those stats, when I was looking at them, said it would save roughly 1 million sick days lost to business because of ill health related to smoking conditions. And it would also save 1 million working hours which are lost in productivity due to just smoking breaks. Now, I have to say, though, I would argue that if those hours were then offered for participation in physical activity, not only would the health of the nation completely would greatly improve. I think productivity would doubly skyrocket. So it's not necessarily about reclaiming that time that that people are using for smoking breaks. It's reallocating that time for something I think that would be much more beneficial. So I think we recognise where exactly where the next piece of work needs to be done, and I think Rachel Hamilton focused very much on the practical legislative requirement here in getting the next stage done. I think the fact, I think we'd all recognise that passive smoking has a hugely bad relationship with children's health. I think that brings me to Rachel Hamilton's motion. I think much work has been done in curtailing tobacco sponsorship and advertising. So I was thinking about, in terms of marketing, where does the main influences come from? And it has to be, for children, the uptake of smoking will be in seeing their parents smoke or their peers smoking. And that's the inadverted marketing tool that is currently working to the benefit of the tobacco companies. So I think it's therefore entirely logical to extend the smoking ban to places where we are actually promoting a healthy lifestyle, where we're promoting opportunities for families to go out and interact. Places like play parks and outdoor sports facilities and activity sites. I can't see how there can be any resistance to such a suggestion. So it's really down to the practicalities of how we would legislate for this, which I'm really interested to see the Scottish Government's position in this. I just feel that this is one of the next extensions of this bill that we haven't quite got round to yet. If there's no resistance, why don't we just get it done? Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Mr Whittle. I call David Stewart, to be followed by Rona Mackay. Ms Mackay is the last speaker in the open debate. Mr Stewart, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And could I also congratulate Rachel Hamilton for securing this important debate this afternoon. As the members already acknowledged, there's clearly a breadth of support across the Chamber for a change in the law and to increase the protections afforded to Scotland's young people from the damaging effects of smoking. This Parliament, of course, has had a strong track record of taking action in smoking and seeking to improve public health outcomes, as previous members have alluded to. And the previous Scottish Labour-led administration introduced the Smoking Health and Social Care Scotland Act 2005, which established that from the 20th of March 2006, it would be an offence to smoke in any wholly or substantially enclosed public space in Scotland, with a number of exceptions. And I would acknowledge the contribution that Kenneth Gibson played in the origins and creation of this legislation. This, of course, was groundbreaking legislation, with Scotland becoming the first part of the UK to legislate for a smoking ban, with England and Wales following our lead the following year. It is, of course, worth remembering at the time that when the vote was passed here in 2005, it did so 83-15, with only the Scottish Conservatives opposing the legislation. However, I always believe in sinners repenting, Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased that they've brought the motion today. However, I'm pleased to see the member now acknowledging the health and social inequalities caused by smoking and the desire to see further improvements introduced. And again, as we've previously heard, in 2016, the Scottish Parliament took further steps by banning smoking in the car if there's a child present. This was another welcome move, and evidence from England and Wales, where the legislation was first introduced, and subsequently in Scotland, has shown that the ban has worked and has led to fewer children being exposed to cigarette smoke. And in Wales, the Welsh Government have now legislated to expand the smoking ban to play parks, as we've heard, playgrounds and outdoor sports facilities, where children may be playing or participating in sport, which I believe is the next step in delivering a smoke-free Scotland. Now, despite...
John Mason.
I'm very grateful for the member giving way. I don't think vaping has been mentioned so far, and I just wonder if he thinks vaping should be treated differently from smoking.
David Stewart.
I think certainly it's worth having a look at. There is a long debate around vaping. Some critics have argued that that also should be banned and has serious health issues. But it's certainly a consideration as a member of the Health and Sport Committee. I would certainly welcome any thoughts that Mr Mason may have on this important subject. But despite these very positive steps, smoking still remains a significant public health issue in Scotland and a leading cause of preventable ill health, premature death and disability. All the evidence shows that there are clear links between tobacco use and inequality, and therefore with health inequalities which the Parliament must work to tackle if we're serious about improving public health outcomes. Now, we've heard from Brian Whittle earlier that smoking rates are still highest in the most disadvantaged areas, with 35% people living in the most disadvantaged areas of Scotland smoking compared to 10% in the least deprived. In my region in Highlands and Islands, statistics from the recent Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation rank parts of Merkin and Inverness as one of the most deprived communities in Scotland. It's an area where I have certain affinity. I grew up and went to school in that particular area. This means, of course, increased ill health and reduced life expectancy for far too many people. And part of the route towards reducing inequalities is through cutting smoking rates, encouraging active living and significant lifestyle changes. So the link between poverty and smoking is stark, and it should note the work that organisations such as the Poverty Alliance are doing in conjunction with Ash Scotland to better support collaboration between public health and anti-poverty interests. While the compliance rates on the current smoking restrictions in Scotland are high, the introduction of a ban in smoking in play parks, for example, is considerably more challenging in terms of policing. So any changes to the law would require a comprehensive compliance strategy and public education programme to be put in place. But the World Health Organization have described clean air as a basic human right, and they have said, and I quote, "Scientific evidence has unequivocally established that exposure to tobacco smoke causes death, disease and disability. Just 30 minutes of exposure to tobacco smoke changes the way in which blood flows and clots, increasing the risk of heart attack and stroke. And second-hand smoke kills more than 600,000 people each year globally, and in many countries it causes more than 10% of all tobacco-related deaths. But despite the progress and public awareness of the damages of smoking made over the last decade, the challenge remains as real and as stark as ever. But the motion we're debating this afternoon is welcome and offers an opportunity for Parliament to demonstrate they are willing to build on the work already done to prevent the damage that smoking causes society and to take further and bolder action to improve public health, protect our young people and ultimately move towards a smokeless society. And congratulations again to Rachel Hamilton for this excellent motion and this debate this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Mr Stewart. And I now call Rona Mackay. Ms Mackay, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Firstly, can I also thank Rachel Hamilton for bringing this important debate to the Chamber. Presiding Officer, children have a right to play, as enshrined in Article 31 of the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child. We all know that play is what teaches our children social skills, how to compromise, be tolerant and resilient. Play is the universal language of childhood. And I believe that children must be able to play safely, and that means without the risk of being affected by passive smoking. We know that passive smoking is especially harmful for children as they have less well-developed airways, lungs and immune systems. Children who live in a household where at least one person smokes are more likely to develop asthma, chest infections, pneumonia and bronchitis. The bottom line is that smoking is dangerous. We know that. It's dangerous for those who smoke and for those who inhale other people's smoke on a regular basis, and particularly children. As Rachel Hamilton mentioned, a law making it illegal to smoke in a car with anyone under the age of 18 came into force in Scotland in 2016, with people caught breaking the new law facing a fine of up to £1,000. So public awareness of the dangers of smoking has greatly reduced the risk to children, with fewer parents smoking in the home and around non-smokers. I suspect that any right-thinking parent who smokes would have the sense not to smoke around children, and I'd be interested to see if there has been any research done on that. However, Presiding Officer, despite the hugely successful Smoking, Health and Social Care Scotland Act 2005, we've heard about, which prohibited smoking in enclosed public spaces, smoking still remains the most significant cause of ill health in Scotland, leading up to 100,000 hospitalisations a year and more than 9,000 premature deaths. And we must protect our children from the effects of passive smoking and the perceived normality that it's okay for adults to smoke around children in their own play areas, which is why I support Rachel Hamilton's motion. And has been mentioned, last month saw the closure of a consultation to the Health, Tobacco, Nicotine and Care Scotland Act, which amended sections of the 2005 Act to provide for offences to be introduced in respect of smoking around hospital buildings. The guidelines issued to hospitals to stop smoking in and around hospital buildings, while partially effective, were not being strictly adhered to, and the consultation asked if legislation should be brought in to make this a legally enforceable offence. So as I understand it, the 2005 Act does give Scottish ministers the power for secondary legislation, and I would support this, and Rachel Hamilton did outline some suggestions of a way that this could be done. Obviously, this would be subject to scrutiny of its effectiveness south of the border and how it's been used to prevent smoking in play parks and outdoor sports facilities and how that's been policed. Rachel Hamilton's motion states that the Welsh Government introduced the Public Health Wales Act 2017, which imposes a ban there on smoking in outdoor where children play or participate in sport. So I think that would be a good model perhaps to look at. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, we want Scotland to be the best place in the world for children to grow up. The Scottish Government has introduced groundbreaking initiatives such as the Baby Box, the Best Start Grant and much more. So any future legislation would be a natural extension of our intention to promote healthy lifestyles and well-being in future generations by protecting them from the harmful effects of passive smoking. Scotland's children have the right to be able to play without endangering their health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Mackay. And I call Graham Tay to close the Scottish Government. Minister, please.
Presiding Officer, I want to thank Rachel Hamilton for securing this debate, allowing us to hear members' thoughts on what is an important and I think largely consensual issue. As a society, we have made considerable progress on smoking prevention. Figures from 2018 show 19% of adults in Scotland were smokers, still too high of course, but a big improvement on the 28% figure in 2003 and almost 34% in 1998. And amongst youngsters, the number of 15-year-olds who smoke regularly has dropped by more than 2/3 over the past decade. People are getting the message, but we are not letting up. Annually, health boards are provided with around £10 million in funding to deliver local stop smoking services. We continue to work tirelessly towards our target of reducing smoking prevalence to 5% or less by 2034, tackling inequalities and addressing the risks around the use of e-cigarettes. We've worked with our partners in local government and others to develop a set of jointly agreed and owned public health priorities for Scotland, which focus the whole system on the things which will give the greatest potential to improve a healthy life expectancy. One of our key priorities is focused on reducing the use of and harm from tobacco and other drugs. Informed by the best available evidence, the public health priorities are based on partnership working and engagement with the wider public and the third sector, and of course local authorities. And it's so important that we work together in partnership as part of a whole system approach which delivers real improvements in the nation's health and well-being. Whilst much has been achieved, we cannot be complacent nor lose sight of the fact that smoking remains one of the most damaging contributors to Scotland's poor health record. If we are to succeed in our ultimate goal of a non-smoking Scotland, then we need to keep moving the agenda forward on all fronts. We need new ways to engage with harder-to-reach groups and to step up efforts to stop children and young people starting in the first place. The Tobacco Control Action Plan is aimed specifically at doing just that. The measures set out in the Action Plan will leave no one in any doubt that we are determined to continue to be a world leader in tobacco control. Sadly, health inequalities between Scots in affluent areas, I think as Brian Whittle touched upon, and those in deprived areas are widening. And it's clear we need to be innovative. We are to drive down smoking rates across the board in order to reach that 2034 target. And I'm pleased that our laws are soon to be extended to include a smoke-free perimeter around NHS hospital buildings. And it's logical that we should go further, target smoking in and around play parks and at outdoor sporting facilities. The main reason for play park restrictions in hospital building legislation is to remove the visibility of smoking. Restrictions don't focus on harm because the smoke quickly dissipates in open air, which minimises the risk. It's actually about reducing the normalisation of this activity. That said, the Scottish Government has no immediate proposals to legislate further on smoking outdoors, not least of all because many local authorities already have restrictions on smoking around playgrounds in parks and other areas. In particular, Scotland's two biggest cities, Edinburgh and Glasgow, have policies in place. In Edinburgh, the smoke-free policy has seen smoking restrictions extended from the workplace and vehicles to surrounding areas for council properties. The rules include entrances, car parks and play areas. There's also a policy... Indeed.
Brian Whittle.
Thank the Minister for taking that intervention. Would you not agree with me that quite rightly he says there are councils that are leading the way. Would it not be for this government to lead from the top, to lead from the front, and try to deliver that across the whole of Scotland?
Minister.
President Officer, I'm going to come on and kind of expand on my explanation. But I think in general, I think that is the direction of travel we need to be headed in. But there are some complications I want to come on to in a minute. There's also a policy in Glasgow City that bans smoking in children's playgrounds, where there's a notice display prohibiting smoking. And such restrictions are replicated in most local authority areas. But to clarify some of what's been asked today, my initial reaction is that it would require separate primary legislation to address this matter. Now, Rachel Hamilton suggested changing the definition of enclosed, that might provide a means of getting around this. But undoubtedly, and I'm sure members will recognise what I'm about to say, lawyers would tell us that the definition of enclosed is one that's commonly recognised and drawn from other relevant pieces of legislation. And if we were to move to change it, then for legal reasons it would have to be proportionate. Saying, for example, that enclosed is to be the same as fenced off would be disproportionate potentially in terms of the fact it could capture vast areas. Now, I'm saying all of this not in order to provide reasons not to act, but to offer a degree of perspective. Our focus in the current Tobacco Control Action Plan is to address health inequalities and cut smoking rates in the communities where people find it the most difficult to quit. And we're committed to conduct a public information campaign on this subject. Since 2006, the Scottish Government has been encouraging local government to restrict smoking wherever possible around schools, playgrounds, outdoor sports facilities and play parks. Smoke-free local authority implementation guidance was also published in 2017 to support councils in implementing their policies at their publicly owned sites. And that means delivering smoke-free buildings and grounds and outlining the responsibilities of partner organisations. The guidance, to be clear, covers schools, playgrounds, nurseries, day centres, parks, local authority premises and other grounds. As Rachel Hamilton pointed out, my Public Health Minister colleague Joe Fitzpatrick has said publicly that we're supportive of the Welsh approach and that we would monitor that. But to be clear, as I understand it, the terms of the Act are still to be fully implemented. And I think partly because of Brexit pressures, there's no timeline for when that's going to happen. There's no definitive timetable in place for when the regulations will be brought forward. So taking the Welsh experience into account is not something we've yet been able to do. And again, I offer that not as an excuse, but as a recognition of the facts. Our action plan states that we will monitor the implementation of smoking bans in Wales and the implementation of guidance produced by COSLA and NHS Health Scotland to assess whether statutory legislation is indeed needed here. As the Parliament's business manager, let me note, in passing, Presiding Officer, how incredibly well populated the legislative landscape is between now and dissolution, populated not only by Scottish Government bills, but also a large number of members' bills and those from committees. So it's unlikely we would be in a position to do anything in this Parliament. Indeed.
Rachel Hamilton.
I understand what the member's saying about the restrictions possibly regarding changing the definition and also having to possibly bring through primary legislation. However, this issue has gone back to 2017, where Joe Fitzpatrick actually stated that he would be looking at monitoring the implementation of the guidelines, which was issued to local authorities in 2017. So it has been rumbling on for quite a long time now, and I have received no indication of how that implementation is going whatsoever.
I think as I touched in my contribution, yes, there was that commitment, but it was also sitting in tandem. We're looking at what was happening in practice in Wales at the same time. So bringing the two things together hasn't yet been possible. And I stress again to Rachel Hamilton, this is not to deflect or to ignore what is an important issue, but those were the commitments that were given. And I think we do need to look at that and recognise, as I said a moment ago, it is highly unlikely there would be capacity in the current Parliament to do that. But I do think there is a direction of travel there that needs to be looked at. But you going back to her point about taking account of the Welsh experience and also the success of the guidance, any decisions that we take as a Parliament on the introduction of any new approaches, any new legislation, should always be taken on the basis of a robust evidence, and also to look at appropriateness and effectiveness. But in principle, I think it's quite clear that there is not a great deal that separates any of us on this issue. So I very much thank Rachel Hamilton for lodging this important debate, and I suspect this is a topic we will return to. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate, and I suspend this meeting of Parliament till 2 p.m.